Did you know the UK's waters are home to basking sharks, these gentle giants as long as a bus, and also tiny seahorses hiding out in our seagrass beds?
Hmm. Yeah,
It's this incredible underwater world, like right on our doorstep. But even when we mean well, sometimes our actions can cause problems for these creatures.
that's exactly right. This vibrant marine life is often more vulnerable than we might realize. It faces pressures from, well, quite a few different sides.
And that's precisely why we're taking a deep dive today into a really useful resource we found. It's a practical guide from Merman Conservation Expeditions Ltd.
Ah, yes. The one called Protecting UK Marine Wildlife from Disturbance.
That's the one. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding how we can appreciate and enjoy our amazing marine life without accidentally causing any harm.
And it's good because it offers pretty straightforward advice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Helps us navigate what can be a complex issue with some simple, effective steps.
Exactly. You, our listener, you shared this guide because, like many of us, you want to be more aware of how to be a better guardian of our oceans. Maybe you live by the coast, maybe you're just visiting, or perhaps you're just fascinated by what's under the waves.
Yeah.
So we're going to break down the key legal protections, get really clear on what disturbance actually means in this context, and give you practical tips so your interactions are, positive ones for the wildlife.
It's all about finding that balance, isn't it, between our natural curiosity about the ocean and, well, our responsibility to protect it.
hmm And this guide lays it all out in pretty easy to understand chapters. It covers everything from the basic laws protecting marine life to identifying protected species.
Understanding what disturbance actually looks like.
Right, and most importantly, how we should behave around these animals. It's almost like having a cheat sheet for being a responsible ocean lover.
Because the UK's marine environment is, well, it's truly special, and it definitely deserves our care.
Okay, let's get into it then. The guide kicks off by painting this picture of just how ecologically rich UK coastal waters are.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about dolphins leaping, or seals basking on rocks, although they are amazing, but also these huge filter-feeding basking sharks and those really shy seahorses clinging onto seagrass.
And it's important to remember it goes beyond the charismatic megafauna, as scientists sometimes call them. The guide reminds us about the vital role played by all the smaller creatures, too.
Like what exactly?
Well, think of the colorful anemones you might see waving in the currents, or the intricate corals that provide habitat, and things like fan mussels that filter our water. These invertebrates, they're kind of the unsung heroes of the marine ecosystem.
And what's really striking, something the guide points out, is that many of these species are unique to our waters. They've evolved right here and aren't found anywhere else on the planet.
Exactly, which really raises the stakes for their protection, doesn't it?
It does.
And the guide does a great job highlighting how each creature contributes to the overall health of the ocean. Take those apex predators, like some sharks. They help keep fish populations balanced.
That's so.
Well, they prevent any single species from dominating and, potentially disrupting the whole food web. Or think about filter feeders, like clams and mussels. They naturally clean the water as they feed. It's quite amazing.
Right, and the guide also points out that habitats like seagrass meadows or underwater reefs, they act as nurseries, don't they? Providing safe spots for young fish and shellfish to grow up before they head out into the open ocean.
Precisely. Even seabirds, the ones we see flying overhead, they play a crucial role by connecting the marine and terrestrial environments. They can also be really good indicators of how healthy our seas are.
It's all interconnected then.
It really is. And, as the guide emphasizes, this delicate balance is facing increasing threats from, well, human activities.
Yeah, that's the sort of reality check part. The guide touches on the problems we often hear about, like overfishing, but also the impact of building along our coasts, the sheer volume of boats and ships.
And, of course, the growing challenges of climate change.
We can't forget the less obvious impacts either, can we? Like underwater noise from ships and construction that can really mess with how marine mammals communicate.
Absolutely. And then there's the persistent issue of plastic pollution, which we're just seeing more and more evidence of impacting wildlife.
And here's a really key point from the guide. Even those of us who are genuinely passionate about wildlife can unintentionally cause harm if we're not clued up on the best ways to behave around them.
Exactly. It's about moving from simply admiring these creatures, which is great,
Mm.
to actively taking responsibility for their well-being.
Which is where the legal side comes in, providing those essential boundaries for how we interact with marine life.
Right.
So, what are the main laws we need to be aware of? The guide mentions a few key ones. The Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, that's been updated quite a bit over time. Mm-hmm. The Conservation of Offshore Marine Habitats and Species Regulations from 2017, and the Marine and Coastal Access Act of 2009. It sounds a bit complicated.
It can seem that way at first glance, yeah.
Yeah.
But the core message, really, is that these laws together create a kind of safety net for marine wildlife across the whole of the UK. That's both near the shore and further out at sea, and it includes areas both inside and outside marine protected areas.
So basically, these rules apply wherever you are in UK waters.
Pretty much, yes.
And it's not just a friendly suggestion. The guide is quite clear that breaking these laws can lead to significant fines or even, in serious cases, imprisonment.
It really underscores the importance of getting this right, doesn't it?
It does.
And for anyone wanting the really detailed legal specifics, the guide wisely directs you to the official government resource. It's called Protected Marine Species, and you can find it easily online at gov.uk/protected-marine species.
Okay, good tip. That's the definitive source for all the legal ins and outs then. So let's look at some specific examples. Protected species and what the guide tells us about the rules for them. This is where we see how these laws translate into, practical advice. Should we start with cetaceans, dolphins, whales, porpoises? They seem to have a really high level of protection.
They certainly do. The guide explains that under those key regulations, COHSR and CHSR, the Conservation of Offshore Marine Habitats and Species Regulations, and the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations, plus parts of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, it's illegal to intentionally disturb, injure, or kill them.
Okay. And even possessing them without a license is illegal too.
That's right. And when we talk about disturbance in this context, well, what does that actually mean if you're out on the water?
Good question.
The guide gives some clear examples. It includes things like getting too close with a boat, or any activity that disrupts their feeding or their breeding or just their resting patterns. Basically anything that significantly interferes with their natural behavior.
Right. So the practical advice from the guide is to keep a good distance. They recommend at least 100 meters. That seems like a simple but pretty crucial guideline.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Maintaining that distance and actively avoiding, surrounding these animals is really key. The guide also notes that porpoises seem particularly sensitive to disturbance.
Ah, interesting. Even though the specific legal bit about disturbance under the Wildlife and Countryside Act is slightly different for them compared to other cetaceans.
Yes, that's a nuance, but the general principle of avoiding disturbance still strongly applies. Better safe than sorry.
Okay. Moving on to seals, both the gray and the common seals we see around our coasts. The guide says they have quite wide-ranging legal protection throughout UK waters.
They do. The guide outlines various laws, including the Conservation of Seals Act from way back in 1970, and updates to the Wildlife and Countryside Act. All of these make it illegal to kill, injure, take, or capture seals.
And didn't something change recently? About fishing nets.
Yes, exactly. The guide mentions the removal of the netsman's defense in 2021. That previously allowed seals to be killed in certain fishing situations, so removing it offers them even stronger protection now.
That sounds like a significant step. The guide does mention an exception, though, for helping seals that are clearly injured or in distress, which is obviously good to know.
Yes, there's provision for tending to disabled seals. It also touches on rules around trading or importing seal products that's covered by the Seal Products Regulations from 2010.
And needing special licenses for certain activities like research.
That's right. The guide highlights that for activities that might otherwise be illegal, like research or maybe some types of monitoring, you'll likely need a wildlife license from bodies like the Marine Management Organization, the MMO, or Natural England.
Okay. Now, what about sharks and rays? The guide lists species like the basking shark, poor beagle, spiny dogfish, and some skates and rays. It notes the level of protection varies a bit.
It does vary by species and the specific law. But what's important to understand, the baseline really, is that for all the sharks and rays listed in the guide, it's illegal to kill, injure, or take them under the Wildlife and Countryside Act.
Right, so the rules around disturbance are maybe less comprehensive than for marine mammals?
Generally, yes. Though the guide does mention specific regulations concerning a fish called houting, which is actually extinct in the UK now, but the protection remains where it's illegal to possess, trade, or disturb them under COHSR and CHSR.
Okay. And there's a general rule highlighted about not using poisons or explosives to catch any fish, which obviously includes these species too.
Yes, that's under all three main laws.
Yeah.
So the main message for sharks and rays is really avoid intentionally harming or disturbing them. And just like with other species, protecting their habitats, the places they feed and breed, is absolutely crucial for their long-term survival.
Makes sense. Let's turn our attention to marine turtles. The guide lists several species and really emphasizes their global vulnerability. It sounds like they have very strong protection here in the UK.
They really do. For most of the species mentioned, loggerheads, leatherbacks, green turtles, hawksbills, and Kemp's Ridley turtles, they are fully protected under all the key bits of legislation. COHSR, CHSR, and the WCA.
Fully protected meaning.
Meaning it's illegal to kill, injure, take, capture, possess them, damage their nesting or resting sites, take or destroy their eggs, disturb them, or even trade them. It's very comprehensive.
Wow, that's a really extensive list of prohibitions. It highlights just how threatened these animals are, doesn't it?
It does. And it's interesting, as the guide notes, that for a couple of other species, the flatback and olive ridley turtles, the protection in the UK currently falls specifically under the Wildlife and Countryside Act.
Right, a slight difference there.
Yes, a specific point to note. But the overarching principle is clear. These are incredibly vulnerable creatures globally, and the law reflects the need to protect them at every single stage of their lives when they're in our waters.
Okay, moving on to seabirds. The guide points out that basically all wild bird species in the UK, which naturally includes our amazing seabirds, have general protection under various laws.
That's right. Under both KOHSR, offshore, and the Wildlife and Countryside Act, territorial waters and land, it's illegal to intentionally kill or injure any wild bird. This also covers taking or capturing them, possessing them or their eggs, without a license.
Damaging their nests or shelters, too.
Yes, exactly. Damaging active nests or shelters, and taking or destroying their eggs.
And the guide highlights that disturbance is also an offense, particularly for those seabird species listed under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. They're especially sensitive during nesting season, right?
Absolutely. That includes a lot of our iconic seabirds, puffins, terns, divers, birds of prey. These species are particularly vulnerable when they are breeding, and any significant disturbance can have a really serious impact on whether they successfully raise their young.
Right, makes sense. Now, for a creature many people find completely fascinating, seahorses. The guide mentions both the short-snouted and spiny seahorses found in UK waters, usually in seagrass beds, and their protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. They seem particularly delicate.
They really are, and the law reflects that. It's illegal to kill, injure, capture, possess, damage their habitat, disturb them, or trade them. But here's a really crucial point the guide makes.
Go on.
You actually need a wildlife license from the Marine Management Organization for any activity that is likely to cause disturbance to seahorses. And this explicitly includes just taking photographs or filming them.
Wow, that's a very high bar, including photography.
Yes.
Yes.
It shows just how sensitive they're considered to be. And the guide is really helpful here because it outlines the signs of stress you might see in seahorses.
Like what?
Things like them rising up in the water column, hanging head down, curling their tails tightly, maybe changing color quite rapidly, or their pupils dilating. Knowing these signs really empowers us, as you said earlier, to be responsible observers.
Absolutely. So what are the best practices then?
The guide suggests don't pursue them, back away slowly and carefully if you see any of those stress signs, and crucially, be incredibly careful around their seagrass habitat. Don't damage it.
Good advice. And it mentions resources like the Seahorse Trust and the WISE scheme for more guidance.
Yes, both excellent resources for learning more about responsible interactions.
Okay, lastly for the species spotlights, let's touch on invertebrates. The guide lists a number, like the beautiful pink sea fan, the starlit sea anemone, the fan mussel. It notes their protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, Section 9 specifically. It's easy to overlook these smaller creatures, isn't it? But they're so fundamental.
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
The guide really emphasizes their ecological importance and their vulnerability. For most of the listed species, it's an offense to kill or injure them, take them from the wild, possess them, damage or destroy their place of shelter, disturb them while they're in their shelter, or trade them.
So quite comprehensive protection for many of them, too.
Yes, although it notes a couple of exceptions. The tentacled lagoon worm and the lagoon sand shrimp or some of those specific protections don't fully apply. But for things like pink sea fans or fan mussels, the protection is strong.
And the guide stresses how sensitive their habitats often are, places like seagrass beds, lagoons, rocky reefs, and that you need licenses for any research or educational activities involving them.
Yeah. It really highlights that conservation efforts need to consider all levels of marine life, not just the big eye-catching species.
It does. And that brings us neatly to a really central point in the guide. Understanding what exactly counts as disturbance. Because it's not always about direct physical harm, is it?
No, not at all. The guide defines disturbance as basically any action that disrupts an animal's normal behavior patterns. That could be feeding, resting, breeding, migrating, looking after their young, their natural life cycle.
And this can often happen unintentionally, just through our presence or maybe our activities like boating or diving or even just walking on the shore near nesting birds.
Exactly. And the impacts, well, they can be quite significant. The guide explains how disturbance can cause stress to animals, forcing them to use up precious energy unnecessarily.
Which could affect their fitness.
Yes, reduce their overall fitness. It could lead mothers to abandon their young, perhaps temporarily or even permanently in some cases. And in extreme situations, it could even cause direct injury or potentially death.
It really makes you think when you see the concrete examples the guide gives. Noisy boats speeding too close, people on kayaks or paddle boards approaching animals too closely,
The temptation some people might feel to chase or even touch animals.
or even feeding them, which might seem kind on the surface, but the guide points out it can actually be very harmful.
Definitely. It can completely alter their natural foraging habits, make them dependent on humans, which is never a good thing for their long-term survival or behavior.
So understanding disturbance is really vital because, as the guide says, minimizing it is absolutely key to protecting vulnerable species and just maintaining a healthy marine environment overall.
Precisely. And to help us do that, the guide offers some really practical advice. Things like keeping a respectful distance, trying to be quiet, avoiding sudden movements,
Never feeding or touching wild animals.
being aware of and following any local codes of conduct or rules, especially in protected areas.
And using non-intrusive ways to observe, like binoculars or zoom lenses. It's all about being a considerate visitor in their underwater home, really.
Exactly. And Chapter 5 of the guide goes into even more detail with specific, actionable steps we can all take to behave responsibly when we're near marine wildlife.
Okay, so what are the key responsible behaviors the guide really emphasizes? It starts with maintaining those safe distances, reminding us again of that 100-meter minimum for marine mammals.
Yeah, that distance is so crucial. It gives these sensitive animals the space to behave naturally without feeling threatened by our presence. And, as the guide suggests, using binoculars or zoom lenses lets us get a great view without needing to get physically close.
Good point. The guide also talks about the importance of navigating carefully when you're out on the water, particularly observing no wake speeds when you're near wildlife.
Right. Reducing speed does a couple of things. It minimizes both the noise from your engine and the risk of accidental collisions. Plus, it prevents creating large waves that can disturb animals resting or breeding close to the shore. Those no-wake zones, they're there for a very good reason.
Absolutely. We should always respect them. The guide also strongly advises against surrounding or encircling wildlife, whether that's with boats or even as a group of swimmers or divers.
That makes complete sense. Imagine how threatening that must feel to an animal, cutting off its escape routes. The best approach, the guide suggests, is to move slowly and predictably, maybe parallel to the animal or from the side or rear, always giving it space and the option to move away if it wants to.
And a really important point we touched on. The guide stresses never to feed or touch wild marine animals.
Yes, that's a huge one. We know feeding them disrupts their natural foraging and can cause health problems or dependency. Plus, as the guide mentions, just touching them, we could unknowingly transfer harmful bacteria or even damage their delicate skin or protective slime layers.
So, hands off completely. What if an animal approaches you, though? Like a curious seal?
Good question. The guide advises staying calm, avoiding any sudden movements. Just hold your position and let the animal choose to move freely around you or move away. Remember, it's their space, and if they approach, they're choosing to do so. Don't reciprocate by trying to touch them.
Makes sense. And when we're observing, the guide recommends using binoculars, zoom lenses, and just natural light whenever possible, right?
Hmm.
Avoid flash photography, especially for sensitive creatures like seahorses.
Definitely. And, of course, it's essential to follow all local regulations. That includes any specific guidelines within marine protected areas and getting any necessary permits if you're planning specific activities like research or filming, as we mentioned with seahorses.
The guide also includes some really helpful extra tips too, doesn't it? Like avoiding making loud noises or splashing unnecessarily near animals.
Limiting the amount of time you spend observing any one particular animal or group so you don't overstay your welcome.
Sticking to designated viewing areas where they exist, like viewpoints on cliffs for watching seabirds or seals.
And importantly, taking the time to maybe gently educate others if you see them interacting in a way that might cause disturbance. It's about fostering a culture of respect.
Yeah, leading by example. The guide even provides a handy little table summarizing these key principles: distance, speed, no encircling, no feeding touching, calm approach, binocular zoom, and following local rules. It's a great quick reminder.
It is. And all of this responsible behavior, it contributes to something much bigger, doesn't it? Which the guide addresses in Chapter 6, the fundamental importance of marine conservation itself.
Right. It's not just about those individual moments we might have with a seal or a dolphin, amazing as they are. It's about maintaining the health and balance of the entire intricate web of life in the ocean.
And how that ultimately benefits all of us. The guide talks about the crucial roles different marine species play. We mentioned predators keeping things in check.
And filter feeders cleaning the water.
It also mentions how marine mammals help cycle nutrients through the water column. They even call it the whale pump effect sometimes.
Ha! I like that. The whale pump effect.
And then you have seabirds linking the land and sea through nutrient transport, like guano-enriching coastal ecosystems, and reef-building organisms like corals or even some mussels, creating essential habitats for countless other species. Every creature, big or small, has a vital role.
And then the guide shifts focus slightly to why this matters directly for us humans. It talks about how biodiversity, lots of different species, leads to healthier, more resilient oceans.
Which in turn support things like sustainable fisheries, providing us with food security.
It also highlights the economic and cultural value of thriving marine environments. Think about tourism supporting coastal communities.
The significance for indigenous cultures in some parts of the world.
And even the absolutely crucial role oceans play in regulating our global climate by absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide.
These are all direct benefits we get from a healthy ocean. And the guide, quite rightly, doesn't shy away from outlining the consequences if we fail to protect it. We're talking loss of biodiversity, the potential collapse of entire ecosystems, and increased vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. These are really serious issues.
It really underscores that marine conservation isn't just a nice to have. It's absolutely essential for the health of our planet and ultimately our own well-being.
Exactly. And the guide emphasizes that it's a shared responsibility. It requires action from governments, industries, but also from each and every one of us through the choices we make.
From the everyday things we buy to how we behave when we're lucky enough to be near the coast, every action has an impact, doesn't it?
It really does. And as the guide neatly summarizes in its Why It All Matters table, each type of marine life contributes in significant ways, and our conservation efforts are fundamentally about protecting those vital roles they play.
So what practical steps can we as individuals take to make a difference? Chapter 7 of the guide provides some really tangible ways we can all contribute.
It does. It starts by just reiterating the importance of respecting those wildlife guidelines whenever we're visiting the coast or out on the water, keeping a safe distance, avoiding disturbance, being mindful on boats, kayaks, paddleboards.
Then it tackles the big issue of reducing our plastic use and preventing marine pollution. It offers concrete suggestions like choosing reusable items over single-use plastics.
Making absolutely sure we dispose of our waste properly, not letting it blow away on the beach.
And reducing our use of harmful chemicals at home that can eventually wash down drains and end up in the ocean. Supporting bans on harmful single-use plastics, too.
Every little bit we reduce genuinely makes a difference in the long run. The guide also encourages supporting marine conservation organizations.
How so?
Well, by donating, if you're able to, volunteering your time, or even just helping to spread awareness of their campaigns and the work they do. Supporting businesses that demonstrate responsible practices, too.
And getting involved in citizen science projects seems like a great way to contribute directly. Things like reporting wildlife sightings through apps or websites.
Yes, that provides really valuable data for researchers and conservation managers. Or participating in local beach cleanups. That's another fantastic way to contribute.
I love the idea of citizen science. And beach cleanups are such a direct, visible way to make a positive impact on your local patch, aren't they?
They really are. The guide also stresses the importance of knowing who to contact if you see a marine animal that looks distressed or injured, and crucially, not trying to handle it yourself, unless you're trained.
Right. And making conscious choices in our daily lives, too, like opting for sustainable seafood choices.
Being mindful of our energy consumption, as that links to climate change, which impacts oceans.
Avoiding buying products made from marine animals where possible, and encouraging greener policies.
All of these actions, no matter how small they might seem individually, they collectively add up. They create a much larger positive change for our marine environment.
And if we do have concerns or maybe witness something that doesn't seem right, like potential illegal activity or an animal in distress, Chapter 8 of the guide provides that crucial information on who to contact and how to report it effectively.
Yes, it gives a really detailed list of organizations to reach out to depending on the situation and where you are in the UK.
Who does it list?
Well, for things like illegal disturbance, habitat damage, or unlicensed activities, it points you to the Marine Management Organization, MMO. For injured or stranded animals, it's usually the RSPCA Wildlife Emergency Line or British Divers Marine Life Rescue, BDMLR. For pollution incidents, the Environment Agency Incident Line.
And it provides specific contacts for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, too?
Yes, it lists Marine Scotland and the Scottish SPCA for Scotland, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, NIEA for Northern Ireland, and Natural Resources Wales, NRW for Wales. Having those specific contacts is really helpful.
It's incredibly useful to have all those key contacts right there in one place. And the guide also explains what kind of information is most useful when you're reporting something.
Yeah, things like the exact location, maybe using, 3 words if you can, the species involved, the animal's condition, the nature of the problem, and any photos or videos you might be able to safely take from a distance. It all helps the responders assess the situation.
And it lists some key signs of distress or potentially illegal activity to be aware of.
Things like boats persistently chasing or harassing marine mammals, divers potentially damaging sensitive habitats like reefs, excessive litter or fishing gear in an area, animals that look obviously sick, injured, or entangled, or clear signs of pollution like oil slicks.
So being observant helps. And the guide encourages us to stay informed generally, doesn't it? By following updates from relevant conservation organizations.
And maybe considering volunteering for local marine and coastal initiatives if you have the time and inclination. Things like beach cleans, habitat restoration projects, monitoring schemes, or helping out at wildlife rehabilitation centers.
It really emphasizes being an active part of the solution, doesn't it? And advocating for the protection of our marine environment within our own communities.
Exactly. And finally, just to round things off, the guide includes a really useful quick reference table in Chapter 9. It basically summarizes the key protected species groups and the main aspects of their protection. Kind of a handy reminder of everything we've covered today.
A quick recap.
Yeah, a quick recap covering marine mammals, sharks and rays, marine turtles, seabirds, those delicate seahorses, and the key protected invertebrates. It just reinforces the incredible diversity of life out there that needs our care and attention.
So to sort of wrap up our deep dive into this really essential guide, being responsible around UK marine wildlife seems to come down to a few key things. Understanding and respecting the laws that protect them.
Being really aware of what constitutes disturbance and actively trying to avoid it.
And making conscious, informed choices in our behavior, both when we're near the sea and in our everyday lives. Our actions, however small they seem, they really do make a difference.
Absolutely. By becoming more informed, more aware, and making those mindful choices, each and every one of us can genuinely play a part in safeguarding the extraordinary biodiversity we have in the waters around the UK.
So maybe consider this the next time you're near the coast. What simple change could you perhaps make, armed with this knowledge, to have a more positive impact? The incredible array of life in UK waters is, well, it's a treasure we all share, isn't it? And its future really does depend on the choices we make today. What small commitment could you make to help these amazing creatures thrive?